Star Wars 7x7 episode 3063. We're going to get into a little bit of spoilery territory with Convergence today. That's the novel by Zoraida Cordova, which comes out today. It is the last novel in Phase 2, Wave 1 of the High Republic Mega Ginormous Storytelling Initiative after Path of Deceit and Quest for the Hidden City. Those two other novels set up the Path of the Open Hand as the main antagonist for Phase 2, and we're going to talk about how the Path plays into Convergence. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So a couple of things right off the bat. First of all, from the Department of Corrections, a couple of tweets went out about the episode yesterday, and it identified Convergence as being part of Phase 2, Wave 3 of the High Republic Storytelling Initiative. That's obviously not right. It's Phase 2, Wave 1, so sorry about that error, and it's been corrected on the website and in our show notes for the podcast. And the other note I'm going to make is that even though at the top I said that this is going to be in spoilery territory, there is one huge spoiler that I am not going to reveal on this podcast. It does involve the Path of the Open Hand, but it's such a big twist in the book that I just doesn't feel fair to be revealing it, especially on the day that the book actually comes out. So there you go. There's all the fair warnings. So if you think back to yesterday's episode, our non-spoiler review, I went over the publisher's summary for Convergence, and the Path of the Open Hand is not mentioned in there at all. Now, that's a bit of a surprise, quite honestly, but that's okay. You know, they're hiding their cards or playing them close to the vest, as it were. The Path of the Open Hand has definitely been set up as the main antagonist for this phase of the High Republic Storytelling Initiative, certainly with Path of Deceit by Tessa Gratton and Justina Ireland. That's the YA book in this wave. And then Quest for the Hidden City certainly goes along with that as well. That's the middle grade junior novel from George Mann. And whereas the Path of the Open Hand is not the main antagonist in this novel, they are certainly present and trying to make things more difficult for everyone involved. Plus, they have another agenda which is rather nefarious, to say the least. I suppose that wouldn't be a surprise considering the Path of the Open Hand. Not only do they have agents on the ground children, in fact, those are the folks specifically tasked within the Path of the Open Hand to do some particularly evil work, but they also have a deal happening with one side in the conflict to develop essentially a biological weapon. And I know I said that I was going to be somewhat spoilery in this episode. I'm trying to find a way to talk about this without necessarily giving up so many of the details of the novel. So not only does the Path have an interest in making sure that this quote-unquote forever war, which has been going on for just 5 years in its current format, but apparently there's been a lot of conflict between the two planets in the past as well, the Path has an incentive to keep this conflict raging, and also as a result of that, the development of biological weapons plays into the Path's hands as well. And this got me thinking about the Path and what its eventual goals are, which we don't know at this point other than they are definitely against the Jedi, but part of that seems like it's the public-facing philosophical dispute, right? The fact that they believe the Force should be free and that it shouldn't be actively used or manipulated by the Jedi. But additionally, there's something else going on, which may be a power-related situation. I mean, it's money or power, right? Like it's got to be one of those two, where internally the mother who's leading the Path of the Open Hand must be aiming for some sort of money or power or control or some combination thereof, and the Jedi stand in the way of those plans, whatever they may be. We don't necessarily know the full contours of that yet. And the novel Convergence doesn't necessarily give us any additional insight into that matter, but what it does kind of bring into relief is the fact that it's the Jedi specifically, in terms of all the different groups that interact with the Force, that the Path of the Open Hand seems most concerned about. There are discussions and mentions of various other Force-affiliated groups, if you will, in this novel as well as in other High Republic novels too, and certainly we're going to see a lot of them when we get to Jedha. I think that's going to be in The Battle of Jedha, audiobook original from George Mann. It's in January, I believe that comes out. But the Jedi in specific seem to be a threat to the Path of the Open Hand in a way that no other Force-affiliated group is, for two specific reasons, and I think I can say that safely, even not knowing what the Path of the Open Hand's actual ultimate goals are. The first of those things is the fact that the Jedi of all of these other Force-affiliated groups seem to be the only one who are using the Force to manipulate things in the real world. They have no problem with, Force pushing or Force leaps or using the Force for lightsaber fights or anything like that, right? The fact that they have these superpowers, for all intents and purposes, makes them especially dangerous for the Path of the Open Hand, which is why the Path is seeking things like the object that gets used in Path of Deceit at the very end of the story that is really horrific and also has echoes to things that happen in Phase 1 of the High Republic. The other thing has to do with something that is almost like proto-Nihil in a sense, that the Path doesn't want to be part of the Republic, and they see the Republic as an encroaching force that will not let them live the way they want to, whatever that kind of living may be. And the Jedi are very specifically allied with the Republic. Yes, there is some, push and pull and question of whether the Jedi are really beholden to the Republic in the same way at this time period as they are maybe in Phase 1 of the High Republic. But it seems like no other Force-affiliated group is going out into the galaxy to enforce any kind of peace and justice in the way that the Jedi are. And certainly they are doing it in tandem with the Republic, especially with the formation of these Pathfinder teams that are going out to explore the frontier. So ultimately, there is definitely some alignment between the public philosophy and the private machinations of what's happening with the Path of the Open Hand. But to truly understand this, we're going to have to learn more about the Mother and her backstory. We do know that she is not an original member of the Path, that she came to it at a later point and essentially took over the direction of the Path for all intents and purposes, but it seems like she is using the Path for her own ends, and again, there is some alignment in them somehow, but there's a lot more about her that we need to learn before we really know what their actual plan is going to be. And so that's what I've got to share with you about the Path of the Open Hand and their appearance in Convergence and their relationship with the Jedi. Again, there is a big twist that happens with the Path of the Open Hand, or at least involved with the Path of the Open Hand, that I'm not talking about here. I don't think it really ends up affecting the stuff that we're talking about here in any material way. It's just a very fascinating thing to talk about, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing about it if you're following High Republic conversations on social media in the coming days and weeks. But for now, that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast, and it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.